Hello Internet, we're talking about the ukulele. My great friend and ardent supporter, Seem Kusik, who has a new baby, little Luna, with his partner Melissa. They're an incredibly beautiful, just statuesque Nordic family. Shout out. Luna, you'll probably see this years later and think, why was that guy wearing pigtails? Never you mind, let's talk about the uke. So, Seem asked me to do a video on the ukulele, and it's actually his good fortune that in the last couple years, I finally learned how to play the ukulele. And I'm going to probably go back and forth with the pronunciation because I was raised in the colonial empire of America, and so I say ukulele. Now, that's a big thing to start with. I'm not going to go into the full history of it, but ultimately, the ukulele is born out of the British and American colonization of the Hawaiian Islands. It was a very different colonialization than the rest of America. Still bloody, but a little bit more insidious because an island, or a series of islands, at that time was actually impossible to conquer and take over, so they kind of did it through economic means. Now, when James Cook landed in Hawaii the second time, there was a little snafu, which I'll actually put a little bit of a description of in the comments. And he was killed, but he was also venerated, and his death didn't actually sour the relationship between the Hawaiians and the British explorers. They came back later with cattle as a gift to present to King Kamehameha, and he was actually able to, over a few generations, cultivate that cattle and therefore gain control over the entire main island. This led to a problem, however, as no Hawaiians knew what to do with the cattle, so they hired a bunch of vaqueros from Spain and Portugal and even Mexico, and these Spanish and Portuguese-speaking cowboys not only taught them the ropes, but brought some instruments. So the guitar and the ukulele are most commonly associated with, in Hawaii, slack key guitar playing, and of course the entire tradition of uke playing. And one thing that's very interesting about both styles, or both instruments rather, is that the Hawaiian method of playing these instruments is to produce a calming effect. Their music, which natively had been developing for probably 2,000 years or more, is varied and has calming and high energy components to it, and different songs for different times require different feelings. But when it came to string instruments, which they only were introduced to 150 years ago, 160, 70 years ago, the methodology was very different for how they employed these instruments compared to their European counterparts. The uke itself was originally an instrument called the machete, and it had a few other names. And structurally, it's a little guitar. It's kind of similar to a vihuela or something like that. The tuning is actually the same as the top four strings of a guitar, with one big difference. That's right, the re-entrant tuning. It starts high, goes low, and comes back up. And that's very interesting. Not many stringed instruments in the West have this characteristic. However, the guitarrón and some other Spanish instruments do. And what happens when you have a tuning like this is that you're able to create a beautiful lifted sound because there really aren't actually any low notes. The lowest note here, the second string, or third string I never liked that, but whatever, is the C. It's actually a middle C on a piano. So the instrument starts at middle C and goes up. All the chords, as we're going to discover, are actually similar to the guitar. And if you play guitar, then you can already form these chords. Now, if you take the basic C chord on a ukulele, it's played like this, with one finger here. And it doesn't really look very much like a guitar chord. But, in a moment, we're going to see how the C, the F, and the G, probably the first three chords you're going to learn on uke, are actually all derived from the guitar. Now, before I continue, one thing I do want to say is that when you play the ukulele, a two-finger approach is good to begin with, thumb and forefinger. The forefinger is kind of like the strumming finger, dunka 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 dunka, in technical terms. All right, Let's take a look at the guitar for a second and see how it compares. Wow, barely a transition at all. Okay, so here I've got my guitar, a nice Epiphone Texan. Come on, Epiphone, I know you're watching. And we've capoed it at the 5th fret. Why have we capoed at the 5th fret? Well, because although the uke has the tuning system of the top 4 strings, it's actually pitched higher, with the high string being an A. So here you have A, E, C, and a G. And notice that that G is lower. So if I play those chords again, but now on the guitar here on this capoed 5th fret, it sounds a lot like an ukulele. One difference being that that G string is way lower, so there's a little bit of weight to this. And if you can see, if I do the thumb and forefinger technique, I get that kind of bass sound out of it. Now, before we go back to the uke, let's take a look at where these chords come from. So this thing that's called a C chord here is really the extension of that G shape that guitar players know so well. Now, of course, capoed up here, it's a C chord. Same thing with this F shape is actually like playing a C chord, but capoed to be an F. And this thing that they call a G, well, it obviously looks like a D chord, but again, capoed to be a G. Alright, so, if we pick our uke back up again, not only do the nylon strings, of course, add more smoothness, but the difference in that tuning with that G being higher gives definitely a loftier, cloudier feeling. It's very beautiful. So the ukulele is definitely derived from the guitar, and that means also that some bar chord shapes that we might know and love, for example this one, all of a sudden we have a doubled note. And that makes for a very nice, again, light, airy feel, but it also means that we can get notes that are right next to each other, something very difficult to do on an actual guitar. And it's just beautiful. It's just very wonderful. It's an interesting instrument also because it represents the history of the colonialization of Hawaii, the changing forever of that native culture, the mixing of the European and eventually Asian immigrants into and creating what was eventually the Republic of Hawaii and is now the current state of Hawaii. It's a very interesting history. I encourage you to check it out and learn about what's going on there and the economic repercussions of colonialization. But also, if you just want to play the ukulele, understand where it comes from, why it's played. If you're Jake Shimabakura and you can do all that fun stuff, that's really cool. But the original intent of the instrument and the way it's continually made today and played in Hawaii is to represent those flowing, calm, beautiful sounds, those natural sounds of the sea, and to promote that method of life. It really is a philosophy as well as an instrument. Thank you.